So this is week 6 of a series we've called King of Hearts, and we're looking at the life and leadership of David, who became the second king of Israel. Very famous character in history, and there's been a lot to learn already. It's actually very rare that we would do a series that goes for more than about kind of 3 or 4 weeks, but here we are at week 6, and probably going to go for a few more weeks, in fact, because we're just getting so much out of this and getting so much great feedback from people who are learning and taking David's life and leadership lessons into their daily lives and into their spheres of influence. Having said that, because it's week 6, maybe you've missed out on one or more of the weeks. And for that, I would encourage you to check out our audio podcast, which you can then take with you anywhere you want. I mean, yes, you can go back and watch on this platform, but if that's not convenient, you can just take us with you in an audio form. So go to any of the major podcast platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, etc., etc., etc. Type in Elevate Church Perth, and we'll be there. And you can catch up on any of the episodes that you've missed. So without any further ado, this is week 6 of King of Hearts, our great teaching team, member extraordinaire Steve Hall, preaching about the blessed heart. Giddy up.
How are you? It has been recorded that those are the most useless 3 words in the human language. How are you? What do we mean by that? How are you? You get those annoying people that come around later on and they'll say, how are you really? See, generally when we say, how are you? It's just an icebreaker. It's just those words that just to start a conversation, but we expect no answer to it. It's like the checkout person, right? Hiding behind that plastic screen of protection. And as they're putting those articles of yours through, between the beeps comes that, so how are you today? Really, that's code for, I'm just taking a lot of money out of your bank account, so I hope you're feeling okay. Your response on the other side of the plastic screen is usually, well, thank you, which really is code for, please don't judge me for all that chocolate that I'm putting through because I really do need it. But what does that really mean when we say, how are you? But there's another 3 words that we use a lot, and I wonder why. That word's like, well, God bless you, especially when someone sneezes. See, that came from the early 600s when there was the Black Plague in Rome. And Pope Gregory at the time encouraged people to say, God bless you. Because when you sneezed, it was like this good spirit coming out of you, and the fear was that you might take that bad spirit, the Black Plague, into you, and therefore, God bless you. Sometimes we use that in just that farewell, when we say, well, God bless you, or bless you, if you're cool. Well, what does that mean? What does it really mean to be blessed? What does it mean? Does it mean that things are going well for you? Does it mean that you're healthy and you're wealthy and you're wise and you're blessed? Like, for example, you might say, Steve, you've been blessed with good looks, of which I would say, I understand that. Others might not agree with you. My mother, who is 97, 10 children, now 92 people in our family, and she says to me quite often, Steve, I've been blessed. What does it mean to be blessed? Because as we go through this series, the King of Hearts, and we've been looking at King David, today I want to talk to you about a blessed heart. But what is a blessed heart? Because I don't think it means things are always going well. Mother Teresa, one of my heroes, is a lady who chose to live in poverty, who chose to work amongst those who were really desperate. And she would say she has been blessed. I mean, Jesus, right? Rabbi, great teacher, Messiah, God in person, sits on the hill and does the first TED talk and starts talking about blessed are those who are mourning. Blessed are those who are hungry and thirsty. Blessed are, doesn't make sense. See, because I know that in my life, there has been some of the darkest times where I have felt more blessed than sometimes in the good times. So what does it mean to be blessed? In Ephesians 1 in the Bible, the apostle writes in Ephesians 1:3 that God has already blessed us in the heavenly realms with every spiritual blessing. So to understand what blessing means, you need to understand what the word is. And in the Bible, the Hebrew word for blessing is barakah. I love that. Barakah. It's got a good feel to it, hasn't it? Well, barakah actually means a transmittal of God's favor. God's favor, God's connection, God's appreciation of who you are. You see, it's not about your circumstance, it's about God's favor in your life, God's presence in your life, God's connection in your life. To barak, or to bless, actually means to kneel down by someone, to empower them to thrive. I love that. That Jesus came to earth and he kneeled down alongside us, that our lives would thrive. So I want to suggest to you today that as we look at the story of King David, that we understand what that means, because you've heard it over again from Mark sharing about the heart of the king. You would have heard him say over and over again that David was a man after God's own heart. I love that concept. He was after his heart. He didn't have his heart. He was after it. He was reaching out for it. He was following after it. It was trying to reach out to it. There's a connection of hearts. To be blessed is when God has a blessing, when there's favor, when there's connection with who we are. So today I want to just talk to you, what does it mean to have a blessed heart? Because David was a man with a blessed heart. And to understand that, we're going to go to a story or an account of David that was very, very significant. You see, you find in 2 Samuel 5, David is now become king. We all know the story. Saul was the bad king. God wasn't happy with him. And it says that God took his blessing off him, his favor off him, and he put that favor on David. So David is now king. He's won all these wars. Everyone thinks he's pretty good. He keeps doing something that Saul didn't do. He kept going to God and saying, shall I go to Hebron? Shall I fight this fight? He asked for God's direction as well as his advice and his opinion, but also his acceptance. And all the time he's asking God, shall I do this? Shall I do this? And he's at now Jerusalem, in Hebron, he moves to Jerusalem. He builds a fancy house. He's got this beautiful palace now. Things are looking good. You would say he's blessed, but there's one thing that David wanted. It was called the Ark of the Covenant. Because he knew that the Ark of the Covenant was significant. The Ark of the Covenant was a big box. It had significant things in it, like the Ten Commandments. And it was represented God's presence, God's favor, God's protection. And he needed to have it in Jerusalem. See, at this stage, it was away from Jerusalem. Because you see, Saul, the king before him, mate, he kind of messed up. He took the ark when he shouldn't have done into battle and he lost it. The Philistines got it. It caused a few problems because God's presence was in the camp. So they sent it off on a cart of bullocks and it ends up in Judea. So it's there and David decides, we're going to go and get this. This, you will notice, it was not recorded that David asked permission. He didn't find out the right way to do it. He just went and did it. So he goes down to the place where it was, and he gets the ark, and they put it on a brand new cart. They went and got this new cart, set it all up, brought it all in. The cart hit a pothole. The ark, this big box, starts to slide off, and the priest, Uzziah, reaches out to touch it and to stop it. God's not happy. And Uzziah, the priest, dies. Now David's not happy. What is going on here? We're trying to do something good, and you take out one of your priests. So David leaves the ark where it is, in Obadiah Edom's place, his house, and he goes back to Jerusalem. So just think about what's going on here. And this is what happens. So Obadiah Edom, he's there at home. He's got this ark in the lounge room, right? And now remember, in those days, his home was not just a few people. Like, he had many. Like, his kids had kids, had kids, had kids. That becomes now the community. And he's got it there, and he's making sure no one's touching that baby, because if they touch it, they could be dead. But this place, this ark, the presence of God, the favour of God is in his house. And we pick up the story in 2 Samuel 6, verse 11. And this is what happened. The ark of the Lord remained there in Obadiah Edom's house for 3 months. And the Lord blessed. He found favour with Obadiah Edom and his entire household. The king, David, was told, the Lord has blessed Obadiah Edom's household and everything he has because of the ark of God. So David went there and brought the ark of God from the house of Obadiah Edom to the city of David with a great celebration. You see, here it was David, he's going, wow, Obadiah Edom, he's got God's blessing because he's got God's presence. And he's going, I want that here in Jerusalem. I want that here for the people of Israel. So what I want to suggest to you today is from this story, how do we posture, how do we position ourselves to receive that favour, that presence, that blessing of God in our lives? Now, much of that you would have already heard through this series, because it's the same thing, but when our hearts are postured in the right place, so God's favour and his blessings become part of us. So from this, I learned a few things. David postured his heart by a number of ways. First, a blessed heart, a favoured heart, is a heart that is a seeking heart. Notice that David heard what was happening in Obadiah Edom's house, and he went, wow, I desire that. You know, maybe you've seen other people, those in your world who've just things just seems to be different. There's a peace about them, there's a joy about them. I trust that we understand that those who know Jesus, there's something different about their lives. And it first starts with a seeking heart, a desire for favour with God. See, a seeking heart is one that goes and saying, you know what? I want what that favour that God can give. See, Jesus said this. He said, I stand at the door and I knock. This is what it goes on to say. And he who opens that door, I will walk in. Are you ready to open that door for the presence of God to walk into our hearts? See, a positioning one is one that desires after, one that longs for, one that says, you know what? I don't want to do this my way anymore. I want a blessed heart. I want a heart that has favour with God. And it starts with a seeking. You see it right through the scripture. You know, we find that even Zacchaeus, a little tax collector, a small bloke He went seeking after what he heard of Jesus, and he climbs up a tree to seek out God, Jesus. And Jesus said, I'm going to come to your house. Zacchaeus was blessed. Well, the others didn't understand that because he wasn't seen as a good person, but because he came seeking, Jesus entered his household, and his household was blessed. It starts off with a seeking heart. And every day we need to be seeking. Every day we need to position ourselves to wait upon God. Sundays are not just about a religious activity. It's about us positioning our hearts that we engage with that favor where Jesus comes and says, I want to be part of your life if you'd only open up that door. You see, a blessed heart starts with a desire. And I trust even now there's a desire on your heart to say, I want the blessings of heaven. Not the good things of heaven, but the presence and favor of God, that we would walk together. But it didn't just stop there. We go on a little bit further. Actually, Proverbs 6:20 says this. It says, whoever gives heed to instructions prospers, and blessed is the one who trusts in the Lord. There it is again. Blessed are those who trust in the Lord. So David's gone out and he's sought out this ark. Interesting, this time he probably went and did his homework. He probably went onto YouTube and looked up, how do you bring back an ark? And he's got the information, and now he's set. And we pick it up in 2 Samuel 6:13. After the men who were carrying the ark of the Lord had gone 6 steps, David sacrificed a bull and fattened calf. Notice this time they put these poles through there was rings on the side of the box, and this time they had priests carrying that ark on their shoulder. None of this go and hire a trailer and put it on the back of a trailer. This time they needed to carry it. They needed to own it. They needed to own the effort for this blessing. And they're now carrying it. And every time it says they stopped, every 6 steps, 6 meters, they kept stopping. David sacrificed a bull, that's a lot of bull, and fattened calf. And David danced before the Lord with all his might, wearing a priestly garment. So David and all the people of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouts of joy and the blowing of a ram's horn. You see, a blessed heart is positioned, is postured in worship. A blessed heart is a worshiping heart. When you worship God, you open that door. When you worship God, you put your life in a posture where God embraces it. I love the picture I got recently. It was out of a book I was reading, and it said, look at prayer is like a river. And the words of prayer are the banks, but the river is God's presence flowing through. And when you get to the ocean, so the words disappear. And David, in worship, which is prayer, he's got these things happening, and you've got this flow of God's presence coming through. So much so that he's just full of expressions of worship, like a river flowing through the banks. Did you notice every time David stopped, he worshipped, he acknowledged. He worshipped by giving a sacrifice. He worshipped by singing praises. He worshipped God. Worship opens up heaven. Worship is what they used to have it open up the presence of God. When we worship God, when we sing songs, when we quote verses, when we look to Him and acknowledge who He is, when we bow down in worship, so we position our hearts for the flow of God's presence to become part of who we are. Worship builds the presence of God in our lives. Don't underestimate coming to church on a Sunday and worshiping God. Don't underestimate that falling down and worshiping Him. 2 Samuel 6 goes on to say this: when David turned home to bless his own family, Michal, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet him. Now, Michal was his wife, right? Came out to meet him. She said in disgust, "How disgusting the king of Israel looked today, shamelessly exposing himself to the servant girls like an vulgar person might do." Sounds terrible, and some suggested that he danced naked, but there are other thoughts that it wasn't that he was naked. You see, now remember this: Michal is Saul's daughter. She's now married to David. And it's all about being the king. And David has taken off his kingly robes and he's now dancing with the servants. He is now celebrating with the common people. He took off that which symbolized him as being better than others to being as simple as others. And she saw that as vulgar. Can I suggest to you that what David describes to us here is a blessed heart, is a humble heart? See, God's favor struggles to become part of who we are when we want to promote ourselves, when we want to big shot ourselves, when we want to let people know how good we are. There's no room for God to show how good he is. So when David took off his garments to worship God as a simple man, not as a king, you know, it's something about that we need to take off those garments of reputation, those garments that promote who we are. In Revelation, it talks about throwing down your crowns. Your crowns are those things that you've achieved. Throw down your crowns before God. In Proverbs, it talks about how a proud man is followed by a fool and a proud heart. And God wants us to actually go, Jesus, I come before you as nothing, because that's exactly what he did. Second Corinthians, it says, you know the generous grace. This is chapter 8, verse 9. It says, you know the generous grace of our Lord Jesus Christ. Though he was rich, he was king, he was the son of a king, yet for your sakes he became poor. He knelt down before us so that by his poverty he could make you rich. Jesus gave us the example of becoming nothing so that you could be blessed. And the blessed heart is a humbled heart. It means to humble. What is it that you need to give up? What is it you need to let down? What opinions, what sense of theological understanding do we sometimes need to drop down at the foot of Jesus? What are those achievements in life I need to put down so that I can receive his presence and have a blessed heart, find his favor? James 4:10 says, humble yourself before the Lord and he will lift you up in honor. But you've got to put down before he can pick you up. But there's something else about David that we pick up here. 2 Samuel 6:17 says, they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in place inside the special tent that David had made for it and prepared for it. And David sacrificed burnt offerings and peace offerings to the Lord. Imagine that celebration. Imagine the excitement. He was so grateful. And here is another point. You see, the blessed heart is a grateful heart. A blessed heart is a grateful heart. We know that gratitude, we find it in the Psalms. Enter my gates with thanksgiving in your heart, it says in the Psalms. That gratefulness and thankfulness actually opens up the gates of God's presence. when we are grateful for our life, when we are grateful for what we have, when we give him the acknowledgement of the air we breathe and the life that we live. I was recently out traveling across Australia, out in the desert actually, out in the Simpson Desert. And when you're out there and you look up into the stars, and I went to pray and I lost my words because all I could think was, God, you are so big. You are so amazing. And yet you would talk to me. See, a grateful heart is a blessed heart. When we are grateful, we position our hearts for God to become everything of who he is in us. But finally, there's another part of this story that is so powerful. We move on to verse 18, 2 Samuel 6:18, when he says, when he had finished his sacrifice, David blessed the people in the name of the Lord of heaven's army. He gave to every Israelite man and woman in the crowd a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, a cake of raisins. Then all the people returned to their homes. You see, when God blesses you, he wants you to bless others. You see, a blessed heart is a blessing heart. A blessed heart is one that gives blessing to others. You see, when Obadiah-Edom had that ark in his house, it says that the whole neighborhood was blessed. When there is a church in a community, the whole community, when God is worshipped on a Sunday, when God is acknowledged on the Sunday, when the favor of God flows in that place, so the whole community around is impacted. David blessed others because he was blessed. A blessed heart is a blessing heart. That you've been blessed to be a blessing. That God has poured his blessing upon our lives so that we would give to others. I want to encourage you today as we look at the King of Hearts, as we look at David, who was a man after God's heart, that I would encourage you to be a man and a woman who would seek after the heart of God in your heart, that you would seek after that blessing. You would seek after that blessing by, first of all, worshipping and having a worshipping heart. You seek after that blessing by having a humble heart. You'd seek after that blessing by being grateful for what you have. And in doing that, you let the blessing flow to those in your family, in your workplace, into others. That you'd want to give to others because you've been blessed. Because you know that favor of God. And again, I just want to encourage you, if you've never really touched that favor of God, you've learned about Jesus, you've learned about that Jesus came to earth and he died and he rose again, but you've never experienced him in your life, then desire after him. Seek after him. Forget about the gods that you've known in others. Forget about those things that are barren. Seek after the God of the universe, the one that says, I've come to you to find favor with you, to bless you, that we might have a one-on-one relationship. Desire after him. Seek after him, and you'll find him. And then when you do, allow the worship of God to flow. And when you do, and you humble yourself before others, because you recognize that it's him who's changed your life, not you. I tell you what, this country will be blessed when we actually learn to live with blessed hearts that are able to bless others. God bless you, and thank you.